Joel Turbor was back on the air doing visicasts, this time as a war correspondent, and he was enjoying his new role. To be sure, the Foundation's fight had not been remarkable for victories, but it was still possible to be philosophic about the matter. After 6 months, the hard core of the Foundation remained untouched, and the hard core of the fleet still existed, while much of the Calganian navy was being neutralized by the necessity of occupying conquered territory. Foundation planetary defenses were being strengthened, Foundation people were being trained, and Foundation ships were being built. At the moment, Turbor was with the Third Fleet in the Anacreonian sector. In line with his policy of interviewing the little man, he was talking to Fennel Leemore, engineer 3rd class on the flagship of the Third Fleet. "You're a volunteer, aren't you, sailor?" "Sure am. If anyone picks a fight with me, I don't have to wait for anyone to drag me in." "You think we're going to win the war?" "Sure bet. Even if things get too bad, that's when I'd expect the Second Foundation to step in. We still got the Selden plan, and they know it, too." Turbor's lips curled a bit. "You're counting on the Second Foundation, then?" The answer came with honest surprise. "Isn't everyone?" After the visicast, a junior officer drew Turbor aside. We picked up a prisoner," he told Turbor. "Yes?" "Crazy little fellow. Claims to be a neutral. Diplomatic immunity, no less. We don't really know what to do with him. His name's Palver, something like that. And he says he's from Trantor. Don't know what in space he's doing in a war zone." Turbor was suddenly alive with suppressed excitement. He remembered quite well his last interview with Dr. Darrell, the day after the war had been declared, and Darrell's mention of the name Preem Palver. "Can I see him?" he asked the junior officer. "Space, I can't say. The old man, Captain Dixell, has him in his room for questioning. Everyone figures he's a spy." "You tell Dixell that I know him if he's who he claims he is. I'll take the responsibility." Preem Palver looked sadly about him, at the tall, skinny captain, at the even taller guard, and now at this new person, big and stout, with his collar open and no tie, who said he wanted to speak to him. Joel Turbor said, "I am perfectly aware, Captain, of the seriousness of my request, but I must be allowed to speak to him for a few minutes alone." "Why can't you question him before me?" the captain wanted to know. Turbor pursed his lips and looked stubborn. "Captain Dixell, while I have been attached to your ship, the Third Fleet has received an excellent press. You may station men outside the door if you like, and you may return in 5 minutes. But meanwhile, humor me a bit, and your public relations will not suffer." It worked. Left alone with the prisoner, Turbor turned to Palver and said, "Quickly, what is the name of the girl you abducted?" Palver stared round-eyed and shook his head. "If you do not answer me," said Turbor, "I will label you a spy, and you may be blasted without trial." "Arcadia Darrell," gasped Palver. "Well, all right, then. Is she safe?" Palver nodded. "You had better be sure of that, or it won't go well for you." "She is in good health, perfectly safe," said Palver in a strained voice. A minute later the captain returned. "Well," he said, "the man, sir, is not a spy. You may believe what he tells you. I vouch for him." "That's so," the captain frowned. "Well, all right, but he can't leave now." "Why not?" asked Palver. "Because we're about to engage the enemy. After the battle is over, assuming we're still alive, we'll take you to Terminus." The Calganian fleet had detected the Foundation ships from an incredible distance and were themselves detected. Like little fireflies in each other's grand detectors, they closed in across the emptiness. The Foundation's admiral frowned and said, "This must be their main push. Look at the numbers. They won't stand up before us, though. Not if Commander Sen's detachment can be counted on." Commander Sen had left hours before, at the first detection of the coming enemy. There was no way of altering the plan now. It would work, or it wouldn't. But the admiral felt quite comfortable, as did the officers, as did the men. The Foundation fleet edged slowly backwards. Hours passed, and the fleet veered slowly off, teasing the advancing enemy slightly off course, then more so. In the minds of the Foundation strategists, there was a certain volume of space that must be occupied by the Calganian ships. Out from that volume crept the Foundationers, into it slipped the Calganians. Those that passed out again were attacked suddenly and fiercely. Those that stayed within were not touched. It all depended on the reluctance of the ships of Lord Stetton to take the initiative themselves, on their willingness to remain where none attacked. Captain Dixell stared at his wristwatch. It was 13:10. "We've got 20 minutes, the lieutenant at his side nodded tensely. "It looks all right so far, Captain. We've got more than 90% of them boxed, if we can keep them that way." "Yes, if." The Foundation ships were drifting forward again, very slowly, not quickly enough to urge a Calganian retreat, and just quickly enough to discourage a Calganian advance. The minutes passed. At 13:25, the Admiral's buzzer sounded in 75 front-line Foundation ships. Rapidly, they built up to maximum acceleration, moving toward the 300-ship Calganian fleet. At 13:30, in a single bound through hyperspace to a calculated spot at a calculated time, 50 ships under Commander Sen appeared from nowhere, tearing savagely at the unprepared Calganian rear. The trap worked perfectly. After a while, it took on the proportions of a rat hunt. Of the 300 Calganian ships, the core and pride of the fleet, only 60 or less, many in a state of disrepair, eventually reached Calgan. The Foundation loss was 8 ships out of a total of 125. Preem Palver landed on Terminus at the height of the celebration. He found the Führer distracting, but he accomplished 2 things and received 1 request. The 2 things accomplished were, 1, the conclusion of a trade agreement whereby Palver's cooperative was to deliver to Terminus 20 shiploads of foodstuffs per month for 12 months at a war price, without, thanks to the battle, a corresponding war risk. And 2, the transfer to Dr. Torrin Darrell of Arcadia's 5 short words. For a moment, Darrell had stared wide-eyed at Palver, and then he had made his own request. It was to carry an answer back to Arcadia. Palver liked it. It was a simple request and made sense. It was, "Come back now. There won't be any danger." Lord Stetton was raging. To feel the firm fabric of his military might coming apart, it turned his veins into flowing lava. Yet he was helpless and knew it. He hadn't slept well in weeks. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. Finally, he summoned Lev Myrus, his first minister.
"Well," Stetton practically shouted at him, "contribute something. We stand here defeated. Defeated, and you know why? Treason. You served the fool I replaced, and you think you can serve the fool who replaces me."
Myrus was unmoved. "I have tried to fill you with my own doubts. Not once, but many times. You have preferred the advice of others because it stuffed your ego better. If you do not care to listen now, say so, sir, and I shall leave, and in due course deal with your successor, whose first act, no doubt, will be to sign a treaty of peace." Stetton glared at him red-eyed, his fists slowly clenching and unclenching.
"Speak, you grey slug! Speak!"
"I have told you often, sir, that you are not the mule. You may control ships and guns, but you cannot control the minds of your subjects. You fight the Foundation, which is protected by the Selden Plan, the Foundation which is destined to form a new empire."
"There is no plan. No longer. Mon has said so."
"Then Mon is wrong. Nearly 400 years of history teach the fact that the Foundation cannot be beaten. Neither the kingdoms, nor the warlords, nor the old galactic empire itself could do it.
The mule did it.
Exactly, but he was beyond calculation, and you are not. And your own military know that you are not, and it has made them cautious. What of your own morale as Lord of Calgan, sir? You don't believe in the possibility of victory because you know that there is none. Stoop, or you will be beaten to your knees. Stoop voluntarily, and you may save a remnant. Take my advice. Release the Foundation man, Homir Mun. Send him back to Terminus to carry your peace offers. Stettin ground his teeth. What choice had he left but to comply? And so Homir Mun left Calgan for home as the unappointed ambassador of peace. Uppermost in his mind was his recent revelation, the revelation he would make to Darrell, Anthor, and the rest of them. For now he knew. He, Homir Mun, finally knew the truth about the Second Foundation. The war was formally ended on an asteroid in Terminus's own stellar system. There were few concessions from the Foundation. Stettin retained his office, but scarcely anything else. His client states could vote for return to previous status, full independence, or confederation within the Foundation, as they chose. In due course, Dr. Darrell played host to the 5 men who, 8 months earlier, had first laid their plans. Peering into his wineglass, Joel Turbor congratulated Homir Mun for his diplomatic success as mediator extraordinary. Mun laughed loudly and joyously. For some reason he had not stuttered in months. "Aye," he said, "I hadn't a thing to do with it. It was Arcadia. When is she coming back from Trantor, Darrell?" "Her ship should dock within the week," Darrell said softly. "Wonderful," murmured Turbor. "Then it's over, really. Who would have predicted all this last spring? Mun's been to Calgan and back. Arcadia's been to Calgan and Trantor and is coming back. We've had a war and won it by space. Just doesn't seem conceivable that all that has happened could have been predicted." "Nonsense," said Anthor acidly. "What makes you so triumphant anyway? You talk as though we have really won the war, when actually we have won nothing but a petty brawl that has served only to distract our minds from the real enemy." There was an uncomfortable silence. Anthor struck the arm of his chair with a balled fist. "Yes, I refer to the Second Foundation. There is no mention of it while you turn somersaults and throw confetti out the window. Do you really think that the mine masters of the Second Foundation are less to be feared because you have beaten down a foolish wielder of space ships?" He paused, red-faced and panting. Mun said quietly, "Will you hear me speak now, Anthor? Or do you prefer to continue your role as ranting conspirator?" "Have your say, Homir," said Darrell. Homir Mun leaned back in his armchair and carefully refilled his glass from the decanter at his elbow. "When I was on Calgan," he said, "I was able to study the records contained in the mule's palace. I am, therefore, in a unique position to estimate the true danger of the Second Foundation, much more so than is our excitable friend here." "And what is your estimate of that danger?" grated Anthor. "Why, 0. There is no Second Foundation." Anthor's eyelids closed slowly. He sat pale and expressionless. Darrell said, "On what do you base this surprising conclusion?" "I deny," said Mun, "that it is surprising. The mule had tremendous resources at his disposal, and he used all of them. He was single-minded, and yet he failed. He found no Second Foundation." "Perhaps it had means of protecting itself against inquiring minds," remarked Turbor mildly. "Even a mind as inquiring as the mule's? I think not. His conclusion is plainly and repeatedly stated in 50 volumes of reports. There is no Second Foundation. The greatest superstition of our age is that the mule was somehow stopped by a mysterious entity superior even to himself. The fact is far plainer. The mule was a freak. He died in his 30s because his impossible body couldn't keep going. His best health was never more than an ordinary man's feebleness. He conquered the galaxy, and in the ordinary course of nature proceeded to die. It's a wonder he lived as long and as successfully as he did. Darrell said thoughtfully, "What about the tampered men whose records Anthor and I have studied so carefully? Help us to see them in focus." "Easily. Your theories on the Tamper Plateau, while interesting, are hardly conclusive. Knowing little of mental science, we tend to blame things on supermen, the men of the Second Foundation. But for Selden, the Second Foundation may have been just a necessary fiction, with a highly specific end in view." Anthor's eyes opened quite suddenly and fixed themselves sardonically on Munn's countenance. "I say you lie." Homer turned pale. "You cannot help lying, but you lie just the same," Anthor continued. Simic laid his withered hand on the young man's sleeve. "Take a breath, young fella." Anthor shook him off none too gently and said, "I'm out of patience with all of you. I haven't seen this man more than half a dozen times in my life, and yet I find a change in him unbelievable. The rest of you have known him for years, yet pass it by. It is enough to drive one mad. Do you call this man you've been listening to Homer Munn? He is not the Homer Munn I knew." There was a medley of shock, above which Munn's voice cried out, "You claim I'm an impostor?" "Where's your stutter?" shouted Anthor above the din. "Where'd you find your new confidence? I say we should test you. Darrell, you have his encephalographic record of 10 months ago. Run one now and compare." "I don't object," said Munn defiantly. "I am the man I always was." "How would you know?" said Anthor with contempt. "I'll go further. I trust no one here. I want everyone to undergo analysis, including myself. Are we agreed? Or do I leave now and go my own way?" Turbor shrugged and said, "I have no objection." Semic moved a hand in silent assent, and Anthor waited for Darrell. Finally Darrell nodded his head. Anthor went first, sitting in the reclining seat with brooding eyes. Afterwards the scanner threw old and new recordings onto the screen. "Satisfied?" asked Anthor. Darrell nodded curtly and took the seat himself. Simic followed him, and then Turbor. Silently the curves were collected, silently they were compared. Munn was the last to sit in the reclining seat. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with a touch of desperation in his voice, he said, "Well, now, look, I'm coming in last, and I'm under tension. I expect due allowance to be made for that." "There will be," Darrell assured him. "No conscious emotion of yours will affect more than the primary waves of the frontal lobe, and they are not important." There was utter silence while Munn was in the chair. Then, in the darkness of the comparison, Anthor said huskily, "It's only a little tension. A coincidence, I suppose." "What's the matter?" asked Munn in a rising shriek. Darrell's hand was tight on the librarian's shoulder. "Quiet, Munn. You've been handled. You've been adjusted. By them." The light went on, and the others saw Munn making a horrible attempt to smile. You can't be serious, surely. There's a purpose to this. You're testing me." But Darrell only shook his head. No, Homer. It's true." The librarian's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't feel any different. I can't believe it." Then, with sudden conviction, "You're all in this together. It's a conspiracy. You're planning to kill me. By space, you're planning to kill me." With a lunge, Anthor was on him. There was the sharp crack of bone against bone, and Homer was unconscious. Anthor rose shakily and brushed his hair back. Turbor said, "How did you guess that there was something wrong with him?" Anthor said, "It wasn't difficult. You see, I happen to know where the Second Foundation really is." Successive shocks have a decreasing effect, so it was with actual mildness that Semic asked, "Are you sure? I mean, we've just gone through this sort of business with Munn." "This isn't quite the same," said Anthor. "I have known the answer from the time I learned that Arcadia had left for Trantor." Darrell raised his arm in sudden consternation. "What has Arcadia to do with it? What are you implying?" "Absolutely nothing that is not plain for everyone to see. Arcadia goes to Calgan, but then flees in terror. Lieutenant Dirige, our best agent on Calgan, is tampered with. Homir Munn goes to Calgan, and he is tampered with. The mule made Calgan his headquarters. But was that a matter of choice or necessity? At every turn we meet with Calgan. Calgan. Nothing but Calgan. The world that has somehow survived all the struggles of the galaxy. Your conclusion, then? Darrell demanded. It's obvious. Anthor's eyes were intense. The second foundation is on Calgan. Turbor laughed unpleasantly. I was on Calgan, Anthor. I was there last week. If there was any second foundation on it, I'm mad. Personally, I think you're mad. And I think you're a fat fool. What do you expect the second foundation to be, a grammar school? Take a look about you here on Terminus. We're at the center, the core of the first foundation, with all its knowledge of physical science. But the number of real scientists on Terminus, even on Terminus, can be numbered at less than 1% of the population. What then of the second foundation, where secrecy must be preserved at all costs? Doesn't it make sense that the cognoscenti would be utterly hidden, even from their own world? Of course we have supposedly beaten Calgan in a war, but what is the effect of that? Now, when the search is on once more for the second foundation, where is the last place we'll look? Right, Calgan. Look, broke in Semic, there's something I don't understand. Harry Seldon said he had established the two foundations at opposite ends of the galaxy. Calgan isn't the opposite end of the galaxy. Anthor seemed annoyed. That's a minor point. Seldon was probably covering up to protect the second foundation, that's all. Darrell cleared his throat. Look here, Munn has woken up. How do you feel, Munn? Rotten, said Munn sulkily. But I heard that last part about Calgan being the second foundation. There's something I want to ask this bright young thing here. Suppose Calgan is the second foundation. Who on Calgan are they? How are you going to find them? How are you going to tackle them if you find them? Ah, said Darrell, I think I can answer you, Homer, strangely enough. Shall I tell you what Semic and I have been doing this past half-year? It may give you another reason, Anthor, why I was anxious to remain on Terminus all this time. I've been working on encephalographic analysis with more purpose than any of you may suspect. Detecting second foundation minds is a little more subtle than simply finding a temper plateau, and I did not actually succeed, but I came close enough. Do you know, any of you, how emotional control works? No? It is first necessary to imagine a mind-resonating organ that can sense variations in the electromagnetic fields of human minds. From there, it is an easy step to imagining a similar organ which orients with its stronger field a weaker mind, much as a strong magnet orients the atomic dipoles in a bar of steel, and leaves them magnetized thereafter. Unfortunately, I knew the functions and equations involved were too complicated to solve at present, so I could never detect a mind worker by his encephalographic pattern alone. But I could do something else. I could, with Semic's help, construct what I shall call a mind-static device to protect us from the mind-resonating process. It is not beyond the ability of modern science to create an energy source that will duplicate a randomly shifting encephalographic-type pattern of electromagnetic field, creating a sort of masking noise or static. At this very moment, the mayor's offices and the legislative assemblies are surrounded with mind static. So are most of our key factories. So is this house. Eventually, any place we wish can be made absolutely safe from the second foundation or from any future mule. And that's it, he ended with a simple gesture of his hand. Turbor seemed stunned. Then it's all over. Great Seldon, it's all over. Well, said Darrell, not exactly. What? Roared Anthor. Are you trying to say— Yes, I am, Darrell continued. Calgan is not the second foundation. You see, I happen to know where the second foundation really is. Turbor started to laugh. He laughed in huge, windy gusts that bounced ringingly off the walls. Finally he said weakly, galaxy. One after another we put up our straw men to be knocked down. We have fun, but we don't get anywhere. Maybe all planets are the second foundation. Maybe they have no planet, just key men spread on all the planets. And what does it matter, since Darrell says we have the perfect defense? Darrell smiled without a trace of humor. The perfect defense is not enough, Turbor. My mind-static device is only something that keeps us in the same place. We cannot remain forever with our fists doubled, frantically staring in all directions for an unknown enemy. And there is a specific world on which the enemy exists. Get to the point, said Anthor warily. What's your information? Arcadia, said Darrell, sent me a simple message. A circle has no end. Do you see? No, said Anthor stubbornly, and he spoke quite obviously for the others. Listen to me. Harry Seldon wasn't lying when he said he located the second foundation at the opposite end of the galaxy. But what is the other end? The galaxy is a flat, lens-shaped object. A cross-section along the flatness of it is a circle, and a circle has no end, as Arcadia realized. We, the first foundation, are located on terminus at the rim of that circle. We are at an end of the galaxy by definition. Now follow the rim of the circle and find the other end. Follow it, follow it, follow it, and you will find no other end. You will merely come back to your starting point, and there you will find the second foundation. There, repeated Anthor. Do you mean here? Yes, I mean here, cried Darrell energetically. Where else could it possibly be? It's the old principle of the most obvious place being the least suspicious. Here we are with our plots and our schemes, thinking that we are keeping our secrecy, when all the time we are in the very heart and core of our enemy's stronghold. It's humorous. Anthor did not remove the skepticism from his face. You honestly believe this theory, Dr. Darrell? I honestly believe it. Then please tell me why we have been permitted to proceed all this time without molestation. Without molestation? Who told you we were not molested? You yourself showed that Munn has been tampered with. What makes you think we sent him to Calgan in the first place entirely of our own volition, or that Arcadia overheard us and followed him on her own volition? We have been molested without pause, probably. But now we have the mind-static device. We can fight back. We can set up artificial electromagnetic patterns unendurable to the minds of second foundationers. Really, said Anthor with the beginnings of enthusiasm, I would like to see this device. But naturally, Peleus, Anthor, said Darrell with a tight smile. He opened his jacket, revealed a device swinging from his belt, and turned the intensity knob to maximum. With a horrible shriek, Peleus Anthor sank to the floor. He rolled in agony, kicked his legs, and tore at his hair. Darrell, somber, turned the knob back to 0. Anthor twitched feebly and lay still. "Help me lift him onto the couch," said Darrell. They might have been lifting a sack of flour. After long minutes, Anthor's eyelids fluttered and lifted. His face was a horrid yellow. His hair and body were soaked in perspiration, and his voice, when he spoke, was cracked and unrecognizable. Don't do that again. You don't know. You don't know. We won't do it again, said Darrell, if you will tell us the truth. You're a member of the Second Foundation, aren't you? Yes, I am a member of the Second Foundation, which, insisted Darrell, is located on Terminus, correct? Yes, you are right in every particular, Dr. Darrell. We knew that Terminus and its physical scientists were becoming interested in brainwave patterns, and that the times were ripe for the development of something like the mind-static device. We tried to control the movement, to join it, but unfortunately we were unmasked. You tried to get me to go to Trantar, didn't you? Darrell asked. Anthor nodded. Had to get you out of the way. The growing triumph in your mind was clear enough. You were solving the problems of the mind-static device. Why didn't you put me under control?" Couldn't. Had my orders. We were working according to a plan, like Selden's plan." He was talking in anguished pants. He twisted his head from side to side in a restless fever. "Besides, if we controlled you, someone else invent device. No use. Had to control times, more subtle. First speaker's own plan didn't work." He ran down. Darrell shook him roughly. "You can't sleep yet. How many of you are there?" "What? What's it? Oh, not many. Be surprised. 50. Don't need more." "All here on Terminus?" Darrell insisted. 5, 6 out in space." He was asleep. There was a pause. Then Turbor said, "How long did you suspect him, Darrell?" "Ever since he came here," was the quiet response. "Gleiss and I had parted badly. He was an unforgiving man. And suddenly, in his last few weeks of life, he sends me his best and most promising pupil. It was out of character. I felt that Gleiss had come under outside influence, and I began to wonder if his real purpose might not be to introduce into my confidence an agent of the Second Foundation. Well, it was so." He sighed and closed his eyes for a moment. Semick put in hesitantly, "What will we do with all of them, these Second Foundationers?" "I don't know," said Darrell sadly. "The sexes can be separated, or, better still, they can be sterilized. And in 50 years the Second Foundation will be a thing of the past." He frowned. It had been too easy. Too easy. They had fallen, these invincibles, like storybook villains. And he didn't like it. Galaxy, when can a man know he is not a puppet? How can a man know he is not a puppet? But Dr. Darrell's thoughts shied away from that which he must face in the end. Soon afterwards Arcadia came home to Terminus. It was apparent on her return that she had changed from a child to a young woman. One evening, after she had been back for a week or two, Dr. Darrell asked her as casually as he could, "Arcadia, what made you decide that Terminus contained both foundations?" She stared at him for a moment, then tossed it off. "Oh, I don't know, Father. It just came to me." A layer of ice thickened about Dr. Darrell's heart. "Think," he said intently. "This is important. What made you decide both foundations were on Terminus?" Now Arcadia waited for several minutes before she answered. What had made her decide? She had the horrible sensation of something slipping just beyond her grasp. "I just knew, Father," she said finally. "The more I thought, the surer I was. It just made sense." "It's no good, Arcadia. Intuition is suspicious when it comes to the Second Foundation. You see that, don't you? It might have been intuition, and it might have been control." "Control? You mean they changed me? Oh, no. No, they couldn't." She was backing away from him. "But didn't Anthor say I was right? Didn't he admit the whole thing was right here on Terminus? Didn't he? Didn't he?" "Arcadia, will you let me make an encephalographic analysis of your brain?" She shook her head violently. No, I'm too scared." "Of me, Arcadia, there's nothing to be afraid of. But we must know. You see that, don't you?" Never in Darrell's life had an analysis proceeded so slowly and cost him so much. Arcadia interrupted him only once. Just before the last switch was thrown, she clutched at his arm and said, "What if I am different, Father? What will you have to do?" "I won't have to do anything, Arcadia. If you're different, we'll leave. We'll go back to Trantor, you and I, and we won't care about anything else in the galaxy." When it was over, Arcadia huddled in the chair and wouldn't open her eyes. Then she heard her father laugh, and that was information enough. She jumped up and threw herself into his open arms. "Father," she gasped, squeezing him tight, "can we let them give us medals now?" "But how did you know I'd asked them to leave us out of the ceremony?" He held her at arm's length for a moment, then laughed again. "Never mind. You know everything. All right. We'll have our medals on a platform, complete with speeches. And, Father? Yes. Can you call me Arcady from now on? But, oh, very well. Arcady. The first speaker looked at the student. 50 men and women, he said. 50 martyrs. They knew it meant death or permanent imprisonment, but they brought the plan through because they loved the greater plan. Yes, Speaker. Tell me what happened in your own words. Yes, Speaker. The young man marshaled his thoughts. It was necessary for the men of the first foundation to be thoroughly convinced that they had located and destroyed the second foundation. Yes, and the purpose of the Calganian War? To show the foundation that they could beat a physical enemy, to wipe out the damage done to their self-esteem by the mule. Yes, but you are insufficient in your analysis. Remember, the population of Terminus regarded us with distinct ambivalence. They hated and envied our supposed superiority, yet they relied on us implicitly for protection. If we had been discovered and destroyed before the Calganian War, it would have meant panic throughout the Foundation. They would never have found the courage to stand up to Stettin. The student nodded his understanding. And now? The course of history will proceed without deviation in the direction indicated by the plan? Unless further accidents, unforeseen and individual, occur. And for that, said the student, we will exist. Except, there is one facet of the present state of affairs that worries me, Speaker. The first foundation is left with the mind-static device, a powerful weapon against us. A good point. But they have no one to use it against. In a century it will become a sterile device, just as encephalographic analysis will become a sterile science. Well, the student calculated for a moment. I suppose you're right. But what I want you most to realize, young man, for the sake of your future in the Council, is the consideration given to the individual promptings forced into our plan in the last decade and a half. Knowledge had to be supplied to the young girl, Arcadia. But when can an individual be placed under control without showing it? Where there is no previous emotional bias to remove. In other words, when the individual is a new-born infant with a blank slate of a mind. Arcadia Durrell was such an infant here on Trantor almost 15 years ago, when the first line was drawn into the structure of the plan. She will never know that she has been controlled, and will be all the better for it, since her control involved the development of a precious and intelligent personality. The first speaker laughed shortly. It is the irony of it all that is most amazing. For 400 years, so many men have been blinded by Selden's words, the other end of the galaxy. Yet our greatest danger lay in the fact that it was possible to locate the second foundation by application of physical modes of thought. The galaxy, you know, is not simply a flat ovoid, nor is the periphery a closed curve. Actually, it is a double spiral, with at least 80% of the inhabited planets on the main arm. Terminus is at the extreme outer end of the spiral arm, and we are at the other, since what is the opposite end of a spiral? Why, the central regions. But that is trifling. Harry Selden was a social scientist, not a physical scientist. He would never limit his thoughts to a map when discussing the opposite ends of the galaxy. The first foundation was at the periphery, where the original empire was weakest, where its civilizing influence was least. The social opposite end of the galaxy would be the place where the original empire was strongest, where its wealth and culture and civilizing influence were most strongly present. Here, at the center, at Trantor, capital of the empire of Selden's time. It is so inevitable. Trantor is where Selden's group had worked, where the data of decades had been accumulated. It was the purpose of the second foundation to protect the plan against enemies, and it was here, in the form of the dying empire, that the greatest threat to the Selden plan existed. Then, when Trantor fell a short century ago, we were able to protect our headquarters. The Imperial Library and the grounds around it remained untouched. It was here at Trantor that Ebbling Miz discovered us, and here that we saw to it that he did not survive the discovery. It was here that we first studied the mule and planned his ultimate defeat. It was here that Arcadia was born, and the train of events was begun that led to the great return to the Selden plan. The first speaker looked out the window at the incredible blaze of the firmament, at the huge galaxy that was now safe forever. "All the universe was once guided from this rock," he said quietly. "All roads lead to Trantor," says the old proverb, "and that is where all stars end." 8 months earlier the first speaker had viewed the crowding stars with misgivings, but no more. Now there was a somber satisfaction on the round and ruddy face of Prem Palver, first speaker. This is David Dukes. We hope you've enjoyed this double-day production of Second Foundation by Isaac Asimov. It was produced by David Rapkin, directed by Bob Walter, abridgment by Peter Michaelos. This program is copyright 1991 Bantam Audio Publishing. All rights reserved.